My name is Mara Vale, and the night I turned 18, my father leaned close to me beside my birthday cake and whispered, "After everyone leaves, we need your signature on a few family papers. Nothing serious, just helping your uncle clean up some old property business." I smiled because that was what I had learned to do in my house when people wanted something from me. I nodded because nodding bought me time. Then, while my mother was refilling glasses in the dining room and my younger sister was posing for pictures under the silver balloons, I slipped upstairs, opened my laptop, joined a scheduled video call with my grandparents' attorney, and formally accepted control of the inheritance my family had been planning to steal before sunrise. By the next morning, the lake house, the investment account, the insurance proceeds, the land, and every dollar my grandparents had protected for me were locked behind a legal barrier my father and uncle could not cross. My father's face went pale when he found out. My uncle, who had already promised the lake property to a developer for money he had no right to collect, called 3 different lawyers before lunch. But before I tell you how everything collapsed, I need to take you back to the first place where I ever felt safe. I was 12 the summer my grandfather, Arthur Vale, picked me up in his old green pickup and drove me out to Willowmere Lake. The house stood at the end of a gravel road, half hidden behind cedar trees and wild blackberry bushes. It was not fancy. The porch leaned slightly toward the water, the kitchen cabinets never closed all the way, and one upstairs window rattled whenever the wind came in from the north. But to me, it felt like the only house in the world that breathed kindly. It smelled of cedar smoke, lemon soap, old quilts, and the cinnamon tea my grandmother Celia brewed every afternoon, no matter how hot the day became. Grandpa handed me a pair of work gloves that were much too big and told me, "A place that shelters you deserves to be looked after." Then he showed me how to sand down the porch rail without tearing the wood, how to clean leaves from the gutters, how to check the dock boards before stepping on them, and how to close the old latch on the boathouse door so raccoons could not sneak in at night. My grandmother taught different lessons. She taught me how to make soup stretch when visitors arrived without warning. She taught me which blankets smelled better after being dried outside. She taught me that books should be arranged in a way that made you want to touch them, not in a way that impressed strangers. Sometimes in the evening, she would sit with me on the porch, her silver hair pinned low, her hand resting on mine, and she would watch the water until it turned copper in the sunset. Some people inherit things because they are next in line. Others inherit because they understand what they are holding. I thought she meant the teacup in my hand. I did not understand that she was talking about me, or about the house, or about the storm she and my grandfather already saw forming inside our family. At home, life was not cruel in a loud way. That would have been easier to explain. Our house in Brookhaven had 3 bedrooms, a tidy front lawn, and framed family photos in the hallway. From the outside, we looked ordinary, even warm. My father, Daniel, owned a small flooring and cabinetry business that had been successful when I was little, but had started losing customers to cheaper contractors and big box stores. My mother, Lorraine, managed the house like a museum where every object had to prove its usefulness. My sister, Paige, was 2 years younger, bright, dramatic, adored, and completely unaware of how much space she occupied because everyone had always moved aside for her. Paige had the larger bedroom, the newer laptop, the voice lessons, the framed certificates on the living room wall. I had a narrow room with sun-faded curtains and a habit of not asking for much. The first time I heard my father talk about selling Willowmere, I was 13. We were eating dinner, and he was scrolling through his phone between bites. "Lakefront property is ridiculous right now," he said. "People are paying premium prices for anything with water access." My mother asked, "Your parents would consider selling?" My father snorted. Dad is sentimental, Mom is worse, but eventually they'll have to be practical. That place costs money. I remember lowering my fork and saying, Grandpa says the house should stay with the person who lives it. My father smiled without looking at me. Grandpa says a lot of things when he's in one of his moods. Then Paige started telling everyone about her school play audition, and the conversation moved away from the lake house, as if my words had been a mosquito someone brushed from the table. After that, I started listening more carefully. I noticed how my father's voice changed whenever Willowmere came up. He did not say, Mom and Dad's house anymore. He said, that asset. He said, the lake property. He said, equity trapped in wood and weeds. My Uncle Conrad, my father's younger brother, began visiting more often. Conrad was a real estate broker with polished shoes, a perfect smile, and a way of making every conversation sound like a deal he expected to win. He would spread papers across our kitchen table, tap numbers with a silver pen, and say things like untapped value and development interest and timing the market. I would stand in the hallway pretending to look for my backpack while he and my father spoke in low voices. When I was 14, Grandpa Arthur died. The funeral was held on a cold March afternoon beneath a sky the color of wet cement. I wore a navy dress my mother said was appropriate and clutched the little wooden whistle Grandpa had carved for me when I was 9. At the reception, relatives brought casseroles, neighbors cried into paper napkins, and my grandmother sat in a chair by the window, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. My father and Uncle Conrad stood near the back door, not grieving in the way everyone else was. They were whispering. Conrad had a folder under his arm. I caught only one sentence, but it stayed with me for years. If we wait too long, it gets tangled. My grandfather had not been buried for 3 hours, and they were already talking about property. Grandma Celia lived 2 more years. After Grandpa was gone, I visited Willowmere almost every weekend. I swept the porch, stacked firewood, washed windows, learned how to reset the breaker when the kitchen lights flickered, and made sure my grandmother had groceries. She never made me feel like a child performing chores. She made me feel like the house and I had been introduced properly and were learning to trust each other. One afternoon, when she was already thin from the illness she refused to name until the doctors forced her to, she asked me to sit beside her on the porch. Her hand was cool and dry around mine. "Mara," she said, "there may come a day when people tell you that love means surrendering what was entrusted to you. That is not love. That is pressure wearing a family face." I wanted to tell her not to talk like that. I wanted to tell her she would get better. Instead, I swallowed hard and nodded. "Promise me you will protect this place," she whispered. "Not because it is worth money, because it remembers who you are." I promised. She died the summer I turned 16. At her funeral, my father cried. I saw it. I do not want to pretend he had no heart. He loved his mother in whatever way he was capable of loving someone who did not solve his problems for him. But 2 days later, he was at the kitchen table with Conrad, calculating taxes, repairs, possible sale prices, and what remained of his business debt. My mother made coffee and listened with the tense attention she used when she was deciding what side of a conversation would keep the house stable. "Now we can finally make a responsible plan," she said. The words were not shouted. They were worse than shouted. They were relieved. For the next year and a half, Willowmere became the place where I could breathe. I got my driver's license, saved babysitting money for gas, and drove there whenever school and weather allowed. I cleaned the gutters in October. I learned how to seal a cracked pipe under the kitchen sink. I scraped flaking paint from the back steps and repainted them a deep green Grandma had once loved. Sometimes I would sit in Grandpa's old chair and do homework while the lake moved quietly beyond the trees. At home, the pressure grew slowly, like a hand closing around my throat. My father's business failed in stages. First, fewer orders, then a missed payment, then creditors, then conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. My mother started saying things like, "Families pull together when things get hard," but she always said it while looking at me. When I was 17, the language changed from hints to plans. "When you're 18, my father said one night, we'll be able to settle the lake house properly." I asked what properly meant. He sighed as if I were being difficult on purpose. "It means we stop pretending an old building is more important than real financial needs." My mother placed a hand on his arm and gave me a soft, disappointed look. "Mara, no one is trying to erase your memories, but memories don't pay bills." That became her favorite sentence. Memories don't pay bills. She used it whenever I mentioned Grandma. She used it when I said Grandpa wanted the house preserved. She used it when Conrad visited with new numbers and glossy brochures from a development company called Shoreline Crest Properties. In those brochures, lake houses became premium waterfront opportunities, trees became cleared build potential, my grandparents' porch became a possible luxury deck on a rendering created by someone who had never heard Grandma laugh. The first real clue came in November, 3 months before my birthday. I was at Willowmere cleaning the upstairs linen closet when I found a small envelope tucked behind a stack of quilts. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's hand. Inside was a business card for Ruth Abernathy, attorney at law, with a note beneath it. "When the time comes, call her." I sat on the hallway floor for several minutes, the card shaking between my fingers. I knew immediately that Grandma had hidden it where only I would find it. My father would never clean that closet. Conrad would never touch old quilts unless he thought cash was folded inside them. I slipped the card into my wallet and told no one. I did not call Ruth right away. Maybe part of me was afraid that if I called, everything would become real. Maybe I still wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding and that my parents would not actually push me aside for money. Then Ruth called me first. It was a Thursday evening in February. I was studying for an anatomy test when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mara Vale?" a calm woman's voice asked. "My name is Ruth Abernathy. I represented your grandparents. We need to speak before your 18th birthday. It is important, and it cannot involve your parents yet." My whole body went cold. Her office was above a florist shop downtown with narrow stairs that smelled faintly of roses and old carpet. Ruth Abernathy was in her early 60s with sharp gray eyes, a navy blazer, and the kind of stillness that made her seem impossible to intimidate. She did not waste words. She placed a folder on the desk between us and said, "Your grandparents created the Vale Family Preservation Trust 6 years ago. The Willowmere property, a managed investment account, a savings reserve, and certain insurance proceeds were transferred into that trust while they were alive. You are the sole beneficiary. I am the trustee until you become of age, at which point you can formally accept your beneficiary authority and participate in all major decisions involving the trust assets." I stared at her. "The house is mine?" She corrected me gently. "The trust owns it. The trust exists for your benefit. That distinction matters because it means your father and uncle cannot sell it, borrow against it, transfer it, or claim it through probate." I could barely breathe. Ruth slid a copy of the recorded deed across the desk. There it was. The lake house had been transferred into the trust years earlier, not after Grandma died, not during some emotional final week, years earlier, while both my grandparents were alive, competent, and very aware of what they were doing. "Why didn't they tell my father?" I asked. Ruth looked at me for a long moment. Your grandfather believed that if Daniel and Conrad knew, they would spend years trying to pressure your grandmother, pressure you, or manufacture confusion around the title. His exact words were, "They will call it business, but they will be selling the only place that ever taught that girl she mattered." I looked down because I did not want Ruth to see me cry. Then she told me why time mattered. Someone had recently searched the county records for Willowmere. Someone had requested copies of older title documents. Someone had asked whether the property was still listed under Arthur and Celia Vale's names. "I cannot accuse anyone without evidence," Ruth said, "but the pattern suggests your father or uncle may be trying to create paperwork before you turn 18. I thought of Conrad's folders, my father's sudden kindness, my mother's careful speeches, my birthday only weeks away. "What do?" I asked. Ruth leaned forward. "You do not confront them. You do not warn them. You do not sign anything they put in front of you. At midnight on your birthday, you will sign the acceptance documents with me as witness. At 8 the next morning, I will record a protective notice against the property. If they attempt to file anything after that, the chain of title will expose the problem immediately." Keeping silent was harder than I expected. In stories, the strong girl always knows exactly how to move. She narrows her eyes, holds her secrets, and waits. Real life is not that clean. Real life is your mother making pancakes and asking if you want extra syrup while you know she may be planning to corner you into signing away your grandmother's house. Real life is your father calling you kiddo in the same voice he used when you were small, and you have to remember that tenderness can exist beside betrayal. Real life is your younger sister sitting on your bed complaining about homework, completely unaware that the adults downstairs are turning inheritance into a battlefield. 5 days before my birthday, my mother came into my room carrying folded laundry she did not need to bring. She sat on the edge of my bed and said, "You know, 18 is a big age. It means learning to think beyond yourself." I kept my face neutral. "What do you mean?" She smoothed a shirt across her lap. "Your father has carried this family for a long time. The business situation is worse than he lets on. If Willowmere sells, we can pay down the debt, keep this house, help Paige later, and still give you something generous for school." I asked, "Who decided Willowmere was being sold?" Her mouth tightened. "No one is deciding without you, but you need to understand that clinging to a building because of childhood memories would be selfish." There it was, spoken plainly at last. If I protected the promise I made to my grandmother, I was selfish. My father joined the conversation as if he had been waiting outside the door. "Conrad has a buyer," he said, "a serious one. They can close quickly." I asked the company name. He hesitated for half a second. "Shoreline Crest. They build tasteful homes, not some ugly resort." I asked how Conrad could have a buyer for property that had not been legally cleared. My father's face changed. "Not dramatically, just enough. You don't need to worry about technicalities." That was when I knew he was not confused. He was relying on my confusion. 3 days before my birthday, Uncle Conrad came by when my parents were out. He caught me in the driveway with grocery bags in my arms and flashed the smile he used on clients. "Mara, perfect timing. Let's talk like adults." We sat on the front steps because I refused to invite him inside. He told me the lake property was worth around $500,000 in the right hands. He told me he had negotiated a fast sale. He told me he could make sure I received $75,000 for college, maybe more if I cooperated without drama. "75,000 out of $500,000?" I asked. He chuckled as if I had made a charming mistake. "At your age, 75,000 is life-changing. You should be grateful your family wants to include you." Then I asked, "Whose name is currently on the deed, Uncle Conrad?" The smile flickered. "Your grandparents' estate, essentially." "Essentially" is not a name. He stood up then, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "Don't let some sentimental attachment ruin a good opportunity. Buyers like this don't wait forever." As soon as his car left the driveway, I texted Ruth. "They are moving faster." Her reply came within a minute. "Then we stay exact. No warnings, no signatures. Birthday at midnight." The night before I turned 18, I drove to Willowmere alone. It was cold enough for my breath to cloud the windshield, and the lake road was empty except for the occasional flash of deer eyes near the trees. I parked where Grandpa used to park, beside the flat stone he called the marker, and walked to the porch with the key he had given me years earlier. The second step still creaked. I loved that sound. It felt like the house saying, "Hello." Inside, everything was quiet. I turned on one lamp in the kitchen and sat at the table Grandpa had built before my father was born. My laptop glowed in front of me. Ruth had sent the documents for review: acceptance of beneficiary rights, trust summary, certificate of trustee authority, property schedule, and a letter explaining the protective filing plan for mourning. I read every page slowly, not because I understood every legal phrase, but because my signature was about to become the line my family could not cross. At 11, I walked outside and sat on the porch. The lake was black under the winter sky. I thought about my grandfather's hands guiding mine over rough wood. I thought about my grandmother's voice telling me that pressure could wear a family face. I thought about my father, downstairs at home, probably sleeping well because he believed tomorrow would end with my signature on his paperwork. I cried then, quietly, angrily, without wiping my face. I was not crying because I might lose the house. Ruth had made it clear that I would not. I was crying because protecting myself from strangers would have hurt less. Strangers are allowed to want what is yours. Parents are supposed to know better. At 11:50 p.m., I was back in my bedroom at my parents' house with the door locked and my laptop open. Ruth appeared on screen from her office, wearing reading glasses and looking as composed at midnight as she had at noon. "Are you ready?" she asked. My hand was shaking, so I pressed it flat against the desk. "Yes." She walked me through the form, one clause at a time. When the clock changed to 12:00 a.m., she said, "Happy birthday, Mara. You are now legally able to accept the beneficiary authority your grandparents reserved for you." I signed my name, not the small, careful signature I used at school, my full name, written slowly, Mara Celeste Vale. Ruth watched, confirmed the signature, and nodded once. "It is done. At 8, I record the notice. Until then, keep this quiet." I slept maybe 2 hours. In the morning, my parents acted strangely cheerful. My mother made coffee and hummed in the kitchen. My father wore a pressed shirt before breakfast. Paige bounced around the house talking about the party decorations, unaware of the tension thickening every room. At 8:06 a.m., my phone buzzed under the table. Ruth's message was only 5 words. Recorded. The title is protected. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The shield was in place. My birthday party started at 4. My mother had invited relatives, neighbors, church friends, Paige's drama teacher, and several people my father knew through business. It was more crowd than celebration. There were gold balloons, a vanilla cake with raspberry filling, trays of sandwiches, and a banner across the living room that said 18 at last. I wore a green dress Grandma once said made my hazel eyes look like the lake after rain. My dark chestnut hair was curled loosely because Paige insisted I should look like the main character for once. I smiled for photos. I thanked people for gifts. I hugged relatives who smelled like perfume and winter coats. All evening, my father watched me with the bright, expectant expression of a man waiting for a door to open. Uncle Conrad arrived late, carrying no gift. He stood near the entryway, checking his phone and whispering into it whenever he thought no one was watching. My neighbor from Willowmere, Mrs. June Larkin, came too. She had lived 2 cabins down from my grandparents for nearly 30 years and had the kind of eyes that miss nothing. While everyone gathered around the cake, she touched my elbow and murmured, "I saw your uncle at the lake last week with two men in dress coats. They were photographing the dock and measuring near the east trees." I nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." Her expression softened. "Your grandmother trusted you for a reason." After cake, my father tapped a spoon against his glass. The room quieted. He put one arm around my mother and smiled at the guests. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Mara. 18 is a milestone. It means stepping into adulthood, responsibility, and family decisions." My stomach tightened. He continued, "As many of you know, my parents left behind the lake property at Willowmere. It has become clear that the best way to honor their legacy is to use that asset to secure the future of the family they loved." My mother nodded solemnly. Conrad watched from near the door, his face unreadable. "We found a buyer," my father said, "and Mara understands that this is the right thing for all of us." The room turned toward me. Every face, every polite smile, every curious neighbor. My father had chosen his stage carefully. He believed I would not embarrass him in front of witnesses. He believed the pressure of public agreement would do what private guilt had not. For 1 second, I saw the little girl version of myself, the one who would have swallowed pain to keep the room peaceful. Then I saw Grandma's hands wrapped around mine. I placed my plate on the table. "I never agreed to sell Willowmere," I said. The silence was immediate. My father's smile froze. My mother laughed softly, falsely. "Mara is emotional today. Big birthdays can be overwhelming." I looked at her. "I'm not overwhelmed." Conrad stepped forward. "This is not the appropriate moment." "You're right," I said, turning to him. "The appropriate moment was this morning at 8. His eyes sharpened. My father looked between us. The guests began shifting uncomfortably, the way people do when they realize they have been invited not to a party, but to a family fracture. Within 20 minutes, most people found excuses to leave. Coats appeared, hugs became brief, voices lowered. Mrs. Larkin stayed until the last non-family guest had gone, then looked directly at my mother and said, "Celia would have wanted Mara to have counsel." My mother's face flushed. "This is private, June." Mrs. Larkin did not move. "Then you should not have announced it in a living room full of people." She squeezed my hand before leaving. That small act almost broke me. When the door closed, my father turned on me, not shouting at first, worse, controlled. "What did you mean by 8 this morning?" I did not answer. Conrad did. His phone was in his hand now, and all the color had drained from his face. "The title has a notice on it." My mother blinked. "What notice?" Conrad swallowed. "A trust notice, recorded this morning." My father stared at him. "What trust?" I said. "The trust Grandpa and Grandma created 6 years ago." The words seemed to remove all the air from the room. My mother gripped the back of a chair. "You went to a lawyer behind our backs?" "Grandma told me to. Your grandmother was ill. Grandma was prepared." My father stepped closer. "You are still my daughter." I looked at him and answered quietly, "Then you should have acted like my father before you tried to sell what she left me." His face hardened. "That property belongs to this family. It belongs to a trust created for me." Conrad snapped. "You don't understand the paperwork." I almost laughed. For months they had counted on exactly that. "Ruth Abernathy understands it. So did the county recorder this morning." That was when my father realized Conrad had known more than he admitted. He turned slowly. "You said we could file." Conrad's jaw worked. "I thought we could." "You thought?" My father's voice rose. "You told me the deed was simple." My mother whispered. "What deed?" Conrad said nothing. I watched the truth begin to move through the room like smoke under a door. Later, I learned what had happened that morning at the county office. At 8 sharp, Ruth Abernathy had recorded the protective notice, along with certified trust documents confirming that Willowmere had been transferred years earlier. At 9:12, Conrad walked in with my father beside him and attempted to file a quitclaim deed, claiming that he and Daniel Vale, as heirs of Arthur and Celia, were transferring the property for sale. The clerk entered the parcel number, checked the title history, and refused the document. The current owner was not Arthur Vale. It was not Celia Vale's estate. It was not Daniel or Conrad. It was the Vale Family Preservation Trust. Worse for Conrad, the deed he tried to file contained a notary stamp that did not match any active notary registration in the county. Ruth was still in the building when the clerk flagged it. At the party, my father did not know all of that yet. He only knew his plan had failed in front of everyone. He tried one more angle. "Mara, listen to me. I may lose this house, do you understand? The bank is pressing. The business debt did not disappear because the store closed. Your sister lives here. Your mother lives here. You live here." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry the business failed, but Willowmere was never your emergency fund." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they were not soft tears. They were angry ones. "How can you watch your family struggle and sit on property worth that much money? How could you watch me grieve Grandma and plan to sell the house she asked me to protect?" She flinched as if I had slapped her. Then came the threat. I knew it was coming before my father said it because his face changed from desperate to cold. "If you fight us on this," he said, "you will not live here while you do it. No college help, no car insurance, no bedroom to come back to. Adults make adult choices, Mara." Paige, who had been sitting on the stairs with wide, frightened eyes, whispered, "Dad!" He ignored her. I felt my hands shake. I folded them so no one would see. "You are threatening to throw me out on my 18th birthday because I won't surrender a property you have no right to sell? I am asking you to stand with your family." "No," I said, "you're asking me to betray the only family members who protected me." I went upstairs before I said something I could never take back. In my room, I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and listened to the muffled argument below. My father's voice, Conrad's, my mother crying, Paige crying too, though no one seemed to notice. I thought I would feel powerful. I did not. I felt hollow. Winning, if that is even the word, does not feel clean when the people on the other side share your last name. The next morning, Ruth called at 7:40 and told me to come to her office. My father and Conrad had already contacted 2 attorneys. Shoreline Crest had also contacted Ruth after discovering that the purchase agreement Conrad signed was worthless because he had never owned the property. "Mara," Ruth said, "there is something you need to understand. Your uncle signed an agreement representing that he had authority to sell Willowmere. The agreement includes a penalty clause if he cannot deliver clear title. Shoreline Crest is likely to pursue him for damages. The attempted deed may also create criminal exposure because of the notary issue." I sat very still. "How serious?" "Serious enough that he needs a criminal defense attorney, not just a real estate lawyer." I was not happy. I need you to understand that. People imagine revenge as a warm feeling. Maybe for some people it is. For me, it felt like standing in the cold after a car accident, alive but shaking, looking at wreckage that used to be ordinary life. Conrad had tried to steal from me. My father had helped. My mother had tried to guilt me into calling it love. Still, hearing that my uncle could lose his license or face charges did not make me smile. It made me tired. It made me wonder how money could reveal so much ugliness so quickly, or maybe how it only pulled back curtains that had always been there. By noon, Shoreline Crest's attorney had sent Conrad a demand letter. The sale agreement required him to pay a $50,000 failure penalty, plus inspection costs and legal fees if he could not provide clean title. Since he had represented himself as an authorized seller, they were also alleging misrepresentation. Conrad called my phone 7 times. I answered on the 8th because I wanted the ringing to stop. "Mara," he said, his voice thin and strained, "you need to tell Ruth to release that notice. If the title clears, I can still negotiate." "The title is already clear," I said. "It just isn't yours." "Don't get clever with me. This can ruin me." "You tried to sell my grandparents' house. I was trying to help the family. You were trying to collect money." He breathed hard into the phone. "Arthur would be disgusted by what you've become." I looked at the photo of Grandpa on my desk, standing beside me on the porch with sawdust on his shirt. "Grandpa built the trust," I said, "so if he is disgusted, it is not with me." Conrad hung up. My father came home that evening looking 10 years older. He had spent the day with a lawyer who apparently told him what Ruth had already explained. Challenging the trust would be expensive, slow, and almost certainly useless. My grandparents had created it while both were mentally competent. The deed transfer had been properly recorded. The trust had a clear beneficiary, a trustee, and a stated purpose. It was not a scribbled note found after death. It was not a vague promise. It was law. My father sat at the kitchen table and stared at his hands. "They really left it all to you," he said. There was no anger in his voice now, only disbelief. I said, "They left it where they believed it would be protected." He nodded once, but not in agreement, more like someone absorbing a blow. My mother could not accept it. For days, she moved through the house like I had personally robbed her. She slammed cabinets, spoke to Paige in overly bright tones, and went silent whenever I entered a room. On the 4th day, she came to my doorway and said, "I hope that house keeps you warm when you've lost us." I wanted to answer sharply. I wanted to tell her I had been losing them for years. Instead, I said, "I hope someday you understand that I did not choose money over family. I chose a promise over pressure." She left without responding. Paige came to me that night. She stood in my doorway wearing pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her eyes red. "Did you know they might kick you out?" she asked. "I knew they might try. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're 15. She looked offended and relieved at the same time. "I'm not a baby." "No," I said softly, "but you're not responsible for this." She sat beside me on the bed. "Were they going to use the money for my college too?" "That's what Mom said." Paige hugged her knees. "I don't want college money from Grandma's house if Grandma wanted you to have it." I leaned my shoulder against hers. "Thank you." She started crying then, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel alone in that house. The following weeks were brutal in quiet ways. Conrad's real estate license was suspended pending review. Shoreline Crest filed a civil claim. The county referred the notary stamp issue to investigators. In a town like ours, public records travel faster than gossip because gossip at least has to pretend it is uncertain. Within 10 days, people knew enough to stop my mother in the grocery store and ask questions with fake concern. My father sold what remained of his business inventory at a loss and negotiated with the bank to keep our house from foreclosure. My mother took a job at a dental office, telling neighbors she wanted structure again, though everyone knew structure had nothing to do with it. Ruth helped me move the important documents to a safe deposit box. She also gave me a letter from my grandparents that she had been instructed to deliver only after the trust was activated and the immediate threat had passed. I took it to Willowmere to read. It was early April, and the lake was just beginning to thaw at the edges. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me for nearly 20 minutes before opening it. The handwriting was Grandpa's, but Grandma had added notes in the margins which made me laugh and cry before I even reached the first sentence. They told me they loved my father and Conrad. That mattered to them, and it mattered that I understood it. They were not punishing their sons. They were preventing them from turning panic into destruction. Grandpa wrote that Daniel had always been a man who confused rescue with entitlement. If someone saved him once, he began to believe they owed him saving forever. Grandma wrote that Conrad could sell anything except the truth, and one day that would cost him. Then they wrote about me. They wrote about the summer I cleaned the porch without being asked, about the way I checked whether Grandma's key was too cold, about how I memorized which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck. "We chose you," Grandpa wrote, "because you never treated Willowmere like a prize. You treated it like a living thing." Grandma's last line was in the margin, "Keep the house kind, even when people are not." That line became my anchor. Keep the house kind, not guarded, not bitter, kind. I decided I would not turn Willowmere into a monument to betrayal. I would not sit on the porch rehearsing arguments with my father until the lake itself felt poisoned. I enrolled in community college 25 minutes away and chose environmental studies, partly because I loved the land and partly because I wanted to understand how places survive people. Ruth showed me that my grandparents had also created a separate education fund. It had started at $60,000 and grown modestly over the years. My father had offered me $75,000 as if it were generosity. My grandparents had already provided almost that much without asking me to trade away anything. Moving out was not dramatic. There was no screaming final scene, no suitcase thrown down the stairs. I packed slowly over a week. Clothes, books, Grandma's old teapot, the framed photo of Grandpa and me, my school papers, and the small jewelry box Paige gave me when I graduated. My mother watched from the hallway once, arms folded. "So that's it?" she said. "You got what you wanted?" I zipped a bag and turned to her. "No, Mom, I got what they wanted for me." She looked away first. My father drove me to Willowmere with the last boxes because my car was too small. We barely spoke on the way. The road curved through pine woods, the same road Grandpa had driven with me in his pickup. When we arrived, Dad carried 2 boxes to the porch and stopped at the railing. He looked out over the water for a long time. "I used to swim off that dock," he said. It was the first memory he had offered that did not have a dollar sign attached to it. I stood beside him. "Grandpa told me." He swallowed. "I forgot how small it felt when I was a kid." "Small in a bad way?" He shook his head. "No, small like the whole world could fit here." For a moment, I saw the boy he had been before debt and disappointment and fear taught him to measure everything by what it could solve. Then the moment passed. He said, "I'm sorry I put you in that position." It was not enough. It was not everything, but it was the first honest sentence he had given me in months. I said, "I'm not ready to forgive all of it." He nodded. "I know." Then he left. Paige visited the following Sunday with a pizza and a backpack full of homework. She claimed she needed a quiet place to study, but she spent the first hour wandering through the house, touching things carefully, as if introducing herself. "Grandma really liked yellow," she said, standing in front of the bookshelf where Celia had arranged old novels by color. "She liked warmth," I said. Paige sat in Grandpa's chair on the porch, then immediately popped up. "Is it weird if I sit here?" "No," I told her. "He'd probably complain you're sitting wrong, though." She laughed, and the sound softened something in the boards under our feet. Later, while we ate pizza from paper plates, she asked, "Can I come here sometimes even if Mom is mad?" "This house is not a weapon," I said. "You can come here whenever you need to breathe." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I think I need to breathe a lot." Conrad did not visit. His life unraveled from a distance. He settled with Shoreline Crest after borrowing money from someone I did not know. His license remained suspended. The notary issue became a criminal investigation, though Ruth warned me that outcomes could vary. I stopped checking. Not because I forgave him, but because I did not want my peace tied to the severity of his consequences. He had already lost the thing he valued most, the belief that he could talk his way through any locked door. My mother took the longest to change, and I do not know if change is even the right word. She came to Willowmere once in late May, not because I invited her, but because Paige left a textbook on my kitchen table and Mom drove her out to retrieve it. She stood just inside the doorway, stiff as a guest in a house where she had once assumed she would have authority. Her eyes moved over the green steps, the polished table, the curtains Grandma had sewn. "It looks the same," she said, "mostly." She touched the back of a chair. "Your grandmother loved this room." "I know." Her mouth trembled, and for a second I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, "Fear makes people ugly." It was not an apology, but it was closer to truth than anything she had said before. I answered, "So does entitlement." She closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." We stood there with all the unsaid things between us. Then Paige came downstairs with her textbook, and the moment ended. Summer arrived slowly. Then, all at once, the lake warmed, the blackberries returned along the fence line. I repaired 3 dock boards with help from Mrs. Larkin's grandson, who refused payment but accepted lemonade. I planted lavender near the porch because Grandma had always wanted to and never gotten around to it. I created a small desk in the sunroom for my classes. Sometimes at dawn, I would sit with coffee and watch mist lift from the water while the house creaked gently behind me. Those mornings did not erase what happened. Nothing erased it. But peace does not always arrive as forgetting. Sometimes it arrives as a place where your nervous system finally stops bracing for impact. People asked me whether I felt guilty. Not directly, usually. They asked in softer ways. "How are your parents doing? Is the house situation better? Do you think you'll ever sell eventually?" I learned to answer without explaining myself to death. My parents were managing. The house in Brookhaven was still theirs. Willowmere was not for sale. No, not eventually. No, not for the right price. No, preserving something did not mean I hated my family. It meant I refused to confuse their emergency with my obligation. The hardest conversation with my father happened in July. He came by alone, carrying a small toolbox. "The porch rail is loose," he said, though I had not asked him to fix anything. I almost told him to leave it. Then I saw the shame in his face and realized he needed something useful to do with his hands. We worked in silence for half an hour. He tightened bolts, replaced 2 screws, and sanded a rough patch near the steps. Finally, he said, "Your grandfather would have done this better." "He would have made us redo it twice," I said. Dad laughed, "Just once." Then he sat on the steps and looked at the lake. "I hated him for leaving it to you." I stayed quiet. Not because I thought you didn't deserve it, because it proved he knew what I was. That sentence hurt more than anger. I sat beside him. "Maybe it proved he knew what fear could make you do." Dad covered his face with both hands. "I am sorry, Mara." This time the words were not defensive. They were not attached to a request. They were not trying to reopen the sale. They were just words placed on the ground between us. I did not pick them up right away, but I did not kick them back either. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a door you open once. It is a fence you repair, board by board, deciding each time whether the next piece is safe enough to place. I did not move back home. I did not give my parents money from the trust. I did not let them make decisions about Willowmere. Boundaries stayed, but Sunday phone calls became possible. Paige came often. My mother sent soup when I had the flu, leaving it on the porch because she was still unsure whether she was welcome inside. My father helped stack firewood in October. He did not mention selling, not once. On the first anniversary of Grandma's death, I invited Paige, my parents, Mrs. Larkin, and Ruth Abernathy to Willowmere for dinner. Conrad was not invited. I made Grandma's soup badly, then fixed it with too much pepper. Paige set the table. My father brought bread. My mother stood in the kitchen for a long time before asking if she could make the cinnamon tea. I handed her the tin. Her hands shook when she opened it. For a moment, the smell filled the room exactly the way it had when Grandma was alive. My mother cried then, not loudly, not for attention. She turned toward the sink and cried like someone finally understanding that a thing can be preserved and still be mourned. After dinner, we sat on the porch while the lake went gold. No one gave a speech. No one needed to. Ruth left first, squeezing my shoulder and saying, "Your grandparents planned carefully, but you carried it the rest of the way." Mrs. Larkin followed, telling Paige to stop by any time for blackberry jam. My parents lingered near the steps. My father looked at me. "Thank you for letting us come." "Thank you for not making me regret it," I said. He nodded. My mother whispered, "Your grandmother would have liked tonight." I looked through the window at the table, the books, the yellow lamp, the place still standing because two people had loved it enough to protect it from the people they also loved. "Yes," I said, "I think she would have." Now, when people hear this story, they often focus on the money, the trust, the property, the failed sale, the forged stamp, the uncle who thought confidence could replace ownership. And I understand why. Those are the dramatic parts. Those are the parts that sound like justice. But when I think back to the night I turned 18, I do not think first about legal documents or county records. I think about sitting alone in my bedroom with my hand shaking over a signature line, realizing that adulthood had arrived not as freedom, but as the responsibility to protect what love had placed in my hands. I also think about what my grandparents understood before I did. They knew that desperation can make people rewrite morality. They knew that some relatives will call something family only when they want access to what you have. They knew that the person most likely to protect a place is not always the oldest child, the loudest voice, or the one with the official title. Sometimes it is the quiet girl who notices the loose porch rail, the girl who remembers how her grandmother took tea, the girl who comes back every weekend without being asked, the girl who is told she is selfish because she finally refuses to be useful. Willowmere did not save my family. Maybe nothing could have saved the version of my family that existed before the truth came out, but it saved me from disappearing inside their needs. It gave me somewhere to stand when guilt was pushed at me like a contract. It taught me that peace is not the same as everyone approving of your choices. Sometimes peace is locking the door, making tea, watching the lake change color, and knowing you did not betray yourself to keep people comfortable. If you are listening to this and there is something in your life that someone keeps calling selfish because they want it, I hope you pause before you believe them. A promise can be sacred even when no one else respects it. A boundary can be loving even when people accuse it of cruelty. And family, real family, is not proven by how much you surrender under pressure. It is proven by who protects your dignity when surrender would benefit them. My grandparents are gone, but every morning the house reminds me that love can be practical. Love can hire an attorney. Love can record a deed. Love can hide a business card in a linen closet because it knows the right person will be the one cleaning. Love can build shelter years before the storm arrives, and sometimes when the storm finally breaks, all you have to do is stand inside what was built for you and refuse to open the door to people who only came for the keys. That is my story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that protecting yourself is not betrayal. Leave a comment and tell me what promise, place, or piece of peace you would protect if the whole world pressured you to give it away. Subscribe to After Silent Stories for more stories about family, truth, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away. I'll see you in the next episode.